Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, May 20th, 2025, and our friend Professor Marandi is back with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Nima.
Let's talk about Witkoff, and he's making somehow new changes in the rhetoric that the United States has right now, and it's not something different from what we've seen so far from Witkoff and the Trump administration. Here is what he said just recently.
Well, the president has been very clear. He wants to solve this conflict diplomatically and with dialogue. And he's given all the signals. He's directly sent letters to the supreme leader. I have been dispatched to deliver that message as well, and I've delivered it. But on the other hand, we have one very, very clear red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of an enrichment capability. We've delivered a proposal to the Iranians that we think addresses some of this without disrespecting them. And so that's important. We want to get to a solution here, and we think that we will be able to. But everything begins from our standpoint, John, with a deal that does not include enrichment. We cannot have that because enrichment enables weaponization, and we will not allow a bomb to get here. But short of that, there are all kinds of ways for us to achieve our goals in this negotiation. We think that we will be meeting sometime this week in Europe, and we hope that it will lead to some real positivity, and that's where we are, sir.
Professor Marandi, we had the foreign minister of Iran and the supreme leader of Iran talking about it and saying that we will enrich with or without a deal with the United States. Your take on what is he talking about? And we know that Iran was talking, this nuclear enrichment is a red line on the part of Iranians. Your take on that?
All you have to do is listen to Witkoff and how he can't even pronounce the name of the country. He is negotiating with the country and he can't pronounce it. And I think that shows the level of his ignorance, which is, I think, probably linked a lot to think tank land in the United States. Because in the United States, ever since I remember, they've been saying that Iran is weak, that Iran is about to fall. All you have to do is just give one more slight push, and it's all going to fall like a house of cards. It's just been like that since the 1990s, I think, and probably the 1980s. But I wasn't pursuing these issues back then all that much to this degree. But so in the United States, that is the mood. That is always the mood. That Iran is weak. There's no need to. Everyone hates the so-called regime. It's falling apart. It's weak. It's vulnerable. The axis of resistance is dead. Of course, no allusion to the defeat of the United States in Yemen, and the fact that, according to the New York Times, they spent $7 billion in ammunition. Uh, the fact that F-18s kept falling into the Red Sea and drones kept being shot down, that's a major defeat for the United States and, of course, for the Israeli regime. And the United States capitulated. They backed off without protecting the Israeli regime at all, or anyone else for that matter. But they don't take these into account. They say, well, no, the axis of resistance is weak. Iran is weak. Iran is vulnerable. Iran's air defenses are all destroyed. And that's just how they are. They're never going to be able to see things from a realistic perspective, not at least under these circumstances. Remember, just till I think last year, they were saying that the Russians are cannibalizing washing machines to take out their chips because they're in a really bad situation. And well, look at the situation now. As we were predicting all along from day one, the Ukrainians were going to lose the war, and so was NATO. And the same is true with Iran. If there is a military conflict between Iran and the United States will fail. I don't believe there will be war. I don't believe there will be war in the sense that the United States cannot wage a war against Iran. They'd have to bring in 1.5 million people. They just don't have that. The costs would be through the roof. And if there is war, the entire Persian Gulf oil and gas industry would be gone. And that would take the Western world back to the Stone Age. So I don't see that happening. What is possible is that the United States would carry out airstrikes, but even that's very difficult. They can't use the airspace of any of the countries in the Persian Gulf. That would be suicidal for those family dictatorships. It'd have to come from Diego Garcia. That would be a 5,000-kilometer flight. If B-52s and B-2s are very vulnerable, they'd have to fly over Iran. They can't fire a few missiles from a few hundred or 100 kilometers away. That their warheads would be too small. So they'd have to bomb the country, and their planes would be shot down. And then Iran would retaliate. And this is Iran's home turf, and they have underground missile and drone sites everywhere. We've discussed this before. There's not a winning scenario for the United States. If they want to shut down Iranian oil exports, well, Iran will also reciprocate. It's not going to lead to any solution for the United States. It'll just bring about humiliation. But Witkoff obviously is being ill-informed. Iran is not going to give up its sovereignty. Iran is a country that has gone through all these years of sanctions, all of these years of threats. It's never under Trump the first or Biden or Obama accepted to shut down its nuclear program or to give up its sovereignty. That's just not the Iranian way. It's, the Iranians, because of their religious culture, especially the influence of Shia culture and grandson of the Prophet in Karbala, this the notion of dignity and resistance is something that goes very, very deep. And the Iranians won't accept that sort of humiliation. They won't accept humiliation at all. So Witkoff obviously is clueless about Iran. He's listening to some of these fools in these think tanks that get a good amount of money, and they're funded by neocons and Zionists who are, you know, in who are in these companies, these major corporations, all these think tanks and all these corporations, the money, they're all they're all linked with one another. So they will say what needs to be said. They will say what these people want to hear in order to have a job. And that is why the United States, and it's quite interesting how these think tanks often work, right? These so-called Iran experts, especially the Iranians, the so-called Iranians, they get funded by the U.S. government or institutions close to the U.S. government, and then they fund senators and congressmen, and it's a sort of circular process. So the government gets money and it goes back to its own people, and it's an echo chamber. They hear what needs to be heard. So the United States doesn't have a real understanding of what's happening in Iran. And if they speak to real people who know a thing or two about the country, they'll say, that's propaganda, that's regime propaganda. I'm used to that sort of thing. But I've always said, I've said this for many years. I've said this for almost 20 years now, that the problem in the West is that there's no accountability. There's no accountability. So these so-called experts on Iran, they make predictions. All you have to do is go back to the 1990s, 2005, 2010, 15, and see what these people were saying about Iran. They've written all sorts of books, they've written articles, they've spoken at think tanks, they've given speeches, and they've made predictions. All one has to do is go over what these people have been saying over the last 20 years, and will see that all of their predictions have gone wrong. They'll make 1,001 excuses, but all of their predictions were wrong. And for some mysterious reason, our predictions have been right. Very, maybe chance, but perhaps our understanding of Iran is far more realistic, just like our predictions about Russia, just like our predictions about the trade war. I think many of us expected the United States to blink first in the face of China, and that's what happened. So, since there's no accountability, and since these people are funded by people in the United States who want to hear a certain narrative, this is what Witkoff is going to hear, and this is what he's going to say. And what he says, of course, is insulting to Iranians because he's saying you do not have, we will not allow you to have sovereignty. And of course, that's no one in Iran is going to accept that. And that is why I think that we should be more skeptical about the chances for a deal, because this is not the first time Witkoff has said it. This is the second time he's saying it within a very short period of time. So either Witkoff is bluffing or he wants to carry out psychological warfare, or Witkoff is serious. And if that's the case, then there won't be a deal. If that's a position that he's going to stick to, there won't be a deal.
If we assume that he's serious about what he's talking about, does he need to put it to talk about it on the mainstream media? Let's assume they want to somehow force Iran to not to enrich uranium. They have to talk with Iranians in the negotiations that they're doing. They can ask the way that, because they're talking to each other right now. There is a connection right now, indirect connection, but they're talking to each other. What's the policy in your opinion? It's all about forcing Iran, putting pressure on Iran, or they want to convince somehow the public opinion around the government in the United States?
No, I think that they're simply not professional, and that the Trump team is really bad, and so is Trump. In fact, Witkoff has serious issues, from my understanding, uh, with the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State is trying to undermine him. And probably that's one reason why he shifted his position on nuclear enrichment. Because if you recall, his first interview was a reasonable one, and he was saying the issue is nuclear weapons. Otherwise, enrichment was not a problem. Then they moved the goalposts, and Iran is not going to accept that. Iran today is much stronger than it was before. The West can say whatever it wants, and these think tanks can say whatever they like. But Iran is in a much more commanding position today. And back then, when Iran was much weaker, comparatively speaking, Iran never gave up its nuclear program. And we have to recall that Iran, once upon a time, was surrounded by the United States. The United States took Afghanistan, then it took Iraq. It had bases in Central Asia. It was in control of the Persian Gulf. And Iran was in a much weaker position back then. It was just beginning to develop a military industry and capabilities. It's not where it is today at all. And Iran back then was much more isolated. Russia was still weak. China was still just beginning to rise. The West was in full control. There was much more harmony between North America and Europe. The situation was very difficult for Iran at that time. Now, look at the change. Iran is a very powerful country. Its allies across the region are very firmly in place. One thing that we should remember is that Hezbollah has won the elections. The municipal elections that took place in Lebanon over the last couple of weeks, you don't hear much about it in the Western media because it didn't go well for them. Hezbollah did extremely well. And in many cases, it was a landslide. So Hezbollah's position and the position of its allies in Lebanon is very strong. And then, as I was saying earlier, Ansar Allah has shown the weakness of the United States. It's shown the weakness of the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy. If the United States is going to lose a war against Ansar Allah, how does it imagine that it's going to win against Iran? Iran, which is infinitely more powerful, and Iran controls half the Persian Gulf. That's why it's called the Persian Gulf. Iran's shore and its islands, they're one side of the Persian Gulf. So how are the Americans going to fight Iran in a standing beside all these glass mansions, these glass palaces? It's not doable. It's not. It's not going to happen. They're not going to succeed. So Iran has a very powerful military compared to the past. Iran's isolation has been broken. Iran is now a member of BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Its relationship with global powers and regional countries have evolved, and the West is in decline. They're divided inside the United States. There are divisions between the United States and Europe. There are divisions. The United States is engaging in multiple conflicts with China over trade, with Russia over Ukraine, and while Trump was promising to end the war in Ukraine, it seems now that the Russians are going to be pressing forward. This is not going to be a good time for the United States to expand the war. And of course, the genocide in Gaza has been shown to be even more ugly than before over the last week. The Israeli regime has been burning kids alive, slaughtering people in very large numbers, much more than before. And while the BBC and the Washington Post and the New York Times, CNN and Fox News and France 24 and Deutsche Welle, and other news channels, Sky News, all of these news channels, and among others, they're silent and they don't want to talk about it. And there are journalists who have, some of them, over 1 million followers. They don't say anything. They don't post any of the footage of these crimes, but people are seeing it. People across the world are seeing it. And now you see that even the British and the French and the Canadians made that statement, which I think was a significant. Not that they have any shame or decency. They don't. They're utterly disgusting, and they are partners in this Holocaust. But things are not going well for them. The protests in London was huge 2-3 days ago. Enormous. Their own people are turning against them. It's getting difficult for the West. And Netanyahu, and you also see Western media turning against the Israeli regime. Now, of course, they're trying to focus on Netanyahu, because what they'll do is ultimately, when they get rid of Netanyahu, they're going to try to say, okay, the problem has been solved, everything is back to normal, as if like the problem with Nazi Germany was Hitler. You remove Hitler and everyone else is fine. The whole system has to be removed. But anyway, they're focusing on Netanyahu. Western media is now attacking him. Something is happening. I don't know how fast it will happen, but Netanyahu is not in a good place. The West is not in a good place. So I don't see the United States as having many cards. And even the Europeans, if they go to snapback, the snapback mechanism, what is it going to do? All the UN sanctions are not very big. They're not very important. And we're already sanctioned by the Americans on every aspect and much more. Right now, we are sanctioned. Everything, the United States and the Europeans, by extension, have sanctioned everything, with or without the snapback. Won't make a difference. But will countries in future even respect the UN Security Council resolutions? Look at the Russian relationship with North Korea. They're ignoring the sanctions. They don't care about the sanctions anymore, because the world has changed, and the United States and the British and the French are not going to be able to use the rules-based order that they founded to keep control over this changing world. It's just not going to happen. So I see Iran in a much more commanding position than the West people and that these experts in the West would like to acknowledge. And I think that it's quite clear that the Trump position is not very good. But Trump is not a well-informed person. Witkoff, as I said, he can't even pronounce the name of the country, even though he's had multiple indirect negotiations with Iran, and he has people telling him exactly what to say and what not to say and what the issue is about. But he's showing a great deal of ignorance. There is not a chance in the world, not a chance in the world, that Iran is going to give up nuclear enrichment. It's just It's Iran. It's part of Iran's sovereignty. It's like saying that Iran can't have an air force, or Iran can't have a navy, or Iran can't have a space program, or Iran can't have a railway. No foreign country is going to be allowed to tell Iran whether they can have a nuclear program or not have a nuclear program. Iran is not, Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Turkey or any other of these countries. It's a very, very fiercely independent country, and it is willing to hurt the Americans and punish them if they have to.
Maybe the next step would be Iran can't have university because they have to learn it.
Yeah, I mean that's basically it. That's basically it. Once you go down that slip, I mean, look at what they did to Iraq. Even right now, Saddam Hussein is gone. He's been gone for 20 years, but they still control Iraq's economy. They spoon feed Iraq with their own oil, their their petrodollars, the dollars that they earn from selling oil. The United States, they have it in American banks. It's all about control. They don't want Iraq to become. Do you think the United States would ever allow Iran to thrive? If they could stop Iran from growing, they would. But right now, it's changing. In the past, Iran has suffered a lot because of the sanctions. For a decade, we had no growth, but now things are changing. Life is still difficult, but now Iran is growing. Now Iran's trade with its major partners is increasing. Uh, the ability of the Americans to impose sanctions on Iran is weakening Iran. Trump constantly puts in new sanctions, and Iran is still selling its oil.
You mentioned the snapback sanctions. We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio was talking about pushing for this sort of attitude on the part of the United States and putting pressure on Europe. But we know that Russia and China are part of that. And how do you see Russia and China and the way that Iran is communicating with Russia and China considering the nuclear deal?
Well, Russia and China are very close to Iran, and the war in Ukraine has brought the relationship even much closer. And the trade war with the United States and the insulting language that Trump and his people use about China regularly and the American media, insulting behavior that they've shown, that's helping to expand Iran-China relations. And I think in the near future we're going to see some interesting news about Iranian-Chinese relations in the next 5-6 few weeks. The world, these two countries are on Iran's side. And if the French and the British and the Germans and the French, British, and the Germans, if they use the snapback mechanism, the Iranians have already said that they will pay a heavy price. And that many interpret as Iran leaving the NPT. And if Iran leaves the NPT, then they will start creating aspects of Iran's nuclear program that are completely secret. And no inspectors will be able to find them. And that would be catastrophic for the West. So they're not in a very good position. Iran leaving the NPT would only empower Iran. And countries across the world will blame the West because it's not Iran that's the problem. It's the West that did not implement the JCPOA. It's Trump that tore up the deal, and it was the Europeans who promised not to ignore Trump's sanctions. They did the opposite. Iran waited for a full year. It continued to implement the deal in full. I was against that, but they implemented the deal in full for a year. I mean, I was against it being done for a whole year. I thought it was right to continue to abide by its commitments, for Iran to continue to abide by its commitments for a while, maybe a few months, 3-4 months. But Iran did it for a full year. And then during the second year, they decreased their commitments gradually. And so it took 2 years for Iran's nuclear program to go back to normal. So when the West was violating the deal. Iran was abiding by the deal. And when the West left the deal, or the US left the deal, Iran continued to abide by the deal. So the Europeans are no moral position. They know how, they have no moral authority to use the snapback mechanism. But if they do, Iran has the cards, because Iran will leave the NPT most probably. And what can the Europeans do? Let's say we have the snapback. They revive the UN sanctions. All the, whatever's in the UN sanctions is already being sanctioned. Far, far more than what's in the UN sanctions is being sanctioned by the United States right now. So it won't change anything. But what will happen is ultimately the Europeans and the Americans are going to have to come crawling back to get a deal, and Iran will make it tougher for them. Just as any deal right now between Iran and the P5+1 would not be the JCPOA. It would be the JCPOA plus, as I like to say. One plus is that it will have to take into account Iran's technological advancements since 2015, advancements which were brought about under sanctions and after the martyrdom of scientists. And the other plus, as I would, like to call it, is all the loopholes that were in the JCPOA, which the Americans used to impose in order not to implement the deal. Those loopholes have to go away, and Iran has to. A mechanism has to be agreed upon where the United States cannot cheat Iran without paying a price. So it won't be the JCPOA; it will be a different deal, or JCPOA plus. But at the moment, I don't think there will be a deal if we take Witkoff seriously. But Iran, as I said, it's in a commanding position.
I remember during the presidential election in the United States, I was talking with many people, experts on the issue of geopolitics and military experts. They were pointing out that the Israeli position in the United States is much stronger than the Ukrainian one, because the Israeli lobby is much more influential. And right now, when we see the way that Donald Trump is dealing with the case of Ukraine, and he said yesterday he talked directly with Vladimir Putin on phone, and more than 2 hours they talked. It doesn't seem that, it didn't show that they're gonna have somehow a ceasefire, a deal anytime soon. And if we get that, if we get that sort of attitude on the part of the Trump administration as a model for us for negotiations with Iran, it doesn't seem that he has something in his mind. He has any sort of robust willing to find a solution. Do you find the case of Iran would be the same? At the end, the United States would leave the case, and I don't know what to do with the. In the case of Ukraine, it seems that would happen in the near future.
Trump is weak, contrary to all the bluster and the buffoonery. He's a weak president. He had the mandate to end the war in Ukraine. He failed. He could have had a deal with Iran. Witkoff said the right things. He changed the goalposts. He flip-flops all the time. When he imposed the tariffs, he said, this is permanent. And then he flip-flopped again. He blinked, he backed down. So, even if we do have a deal, let's say somehow Trump comes to his senses and Witkoff learns how to pronounce the name of Iran, and ultimately they have some sort of deal with the Iranians. What's the next problem, Nima? The next problem is that you and I may be right now speaking, as we speak. It's a live program. Trump may just have woken up in the morning and put out a Truth Social post saying something completely different about Ukraine, about Iran, about the trade war. So even if we have a deal, who's to say that he's going to implement it? Who's to say he's even going to stay in it? The ceasefire deal in Gaza was his deal. He and Witkoff put a ceasefire in place that on the eve of his inauguration. He tore up that deal. It was supposed to be in 3 phases. A couple of weeks after it began to be implemented, he said the Palestinians must leave the land. They must be ethnically cleansed. So how can you put any faith in a person like that? At the time being, my belief is that the chances for a deal have declined. But even if there is a deal somehow, I don't see how we can be sure that it's ever going to survive Trump and his posts and his outbursts and his flip-flopping and the fact that his own team is so divided and everyone is saying something different. It's not clear who's in charge. Is Witkoff the Secretary of State or not? Who's the Secretary of State? So the flip-flopping and the hostility between members of the team and the contradictory messages coming, just like in Ukraine. Kellogg was saying one thing, Witkoff and Trump were saying something else. Now they're all sounding more like Kellogg. Just another sign that Trump is weak. He's not an effective president. He's not strong.
Professor, here is what General Petraeus said about the deal between the United States and Iran. And even he talked about the regime change, the so-called regime change in Iran. Here is what he said.
Has been brought into the fold. Do you think there is a chance of Iran also being brought back into the fold?
That's probably a bit over-optimistic, but there's a chance that there could be a nuclear deal that doesn't have some of the shortcomings of the previous nuclear deal that could enable the lifting of sanctions progressively and so forth as confidence is built, and that could lead to them being a more constructive player in the region than they certainly have been for many decades, noting all the damage that has been done by their proxies in this region and still being done by the Houthis, who have still not resolved the issues there. So I think it's an opportunity that all are working as hard as they can to achieve. You can see the narrowing of the differences between the U.S. position and the Iranian position. No enrichment whatsoever is the U.S. opening. Maybe that ends up being for 3 years, and then you have an opportunity to do something smaller. Again, but you can actually see this deal starting to come together. And assuming Iran then also stops some of the terrible activities that they're doing through proxies in the region, which have been so destabilizing, then you can start to see the contours of something that could be much more positive.
Do you think, I'll come to Nabil again in a second, but do you think that regime change is now slightly off the table with Iran? I remember years ago, Rumsfeld always making the point that you had two contradictory aims in Iran. One was regime change and the other was trying to stop them getting the bomb. And the more you tried to stop them getting the bomb, the more that the population rallied to the regime.
You know, a CIA director learns really quickly that you have to deal with the world the way it is, not the way you'd like it to be. And I never thought that regime change was at all realistic, frankly.
Yeah.
Nima, their problem is that they sit and they have these echo chambers. Do they ever have any real people from Iran? So, for example, first of all, say Iran come into the fold.
Yeah.
As if they're the ones who are isolated. Who are their friends? Iceland, Panama, Canada. Who's a friend of the United States? The EU at 20% tariffs, or China? Are things getting better with China? Who's a friend of the United States? Is it Russia? They're under the assumption that somehow they are the center of the universe. And somehow are we going to be forgiven? Will we be able to take our place at their table once again, or have a place at their table? We don't want their table. We don't want to be at there. We're not, again, the Iranian leaders, they're not Erdogan. They're not Sisi. This is a country that is very, very, very independent-minded. They will not accept a Eurocentric world. It's just not going to happen. There's a reason why Iran was called the axis of evil, because Iran opposed empire. And there's another contradiction here. I thought all of Iran's so-called proxies had been destroyed and weakened. So why is Petraeus so upset about the horrible things that we're doing across the region? I thought that was over. So, and Syria, as I said, it's not going well for them at all. I don't want to pretend that I'm like, well, that I get things right, but Syria is not, and it's not going well at all for any of these actors that were involved in the overthrow of the Syrian government. So, so we were hearing that Iran is sitting naked. It has no air defense. Its proxies, as they call them, are all destroyed. All but now we hear that our so-called proxies, they're creating chaos and horror across the region. They don't see the inconsistencies in their own narrative. And why? Because they sit around and talk to themselves, and the host says the regime, which that's one reason why I call Western governments regimes, because that's how they constantly speak about Iran. So it's the host himself has not the least bit of balance, and Petraeus, of course, is a failed general. We can go into his failures as a general, and who he actually is and what he's done and what harm he's caused for the American people and for the world and for our region in particular. But he's completely ignorant, and it just shows that it doesn't matter if it's Witkoff or Petraeus or anyone else or Blinken. They are utterly ignorant. They are listening to narrative builders who are a part of the empire itself, and everything that's being produced, all that knowledge that's being produced is knowledge, the so-called knowledge that is in line with the hopes and aspirations of the American empire. So that's why I think that Witkoff is probably not ready for a real negotiation, because he's probably listening to all the wrong people.
And you talk about the case of Yemen, and Petraeus was talking about the Iranian proxies, and they consider Yemen as Iranian proxy. But we've learned that the American aircraft carrier is just leaving the Red Sea, and the new ban on Israeli port coming from Yemen. Here is what Yemenis were talking about: in a new ban on Israel.
The Yemeni armed forces have decided to implement the directives of the country's leader by initiating the enforcement of a naval blockade on the port of Haifa. According to the new directive, all companies with ships currently in or heading to that port are hereby notified that, as of the time of this announcement, the port of Haifa has been added to the target list.
I love this guy.
Yeah. They're so tough, and the way that they're fighting. Do you think that, if we know that right now the situation in Gaza is so dire and the situation is not that much?
Oh, and yes, sorry, I forgot to say this. And then Petraeus has the audacity to say that Iranian allies, or what he calls proxies, they're spreading evil across the region. The U.S. is carrying out a genocide. They're carrying out a Holocaust. He's supporting a Holocaust. He and people like him are the most sinister people on this planet. This is probably the most evil crime that has been committed over the past few hundred years. Because it's being carried out in front of our faces. It's being done in front of the world. Not for 1 week or 2 weeks or 1 month or two. It's for 19 months. And the Western media has been behind it. They've been apologetic. They've been trying to hide reality. First, when the first hospital was struck by the Israelis, these Western media uh, agencies, Western news agencies and media outlets, they tried to blame the resistance and say an errant, a rocket failed and hit and killed hundreds of people, some small rocket. And then Western intelligence agencies, one after another, were saying, yes, our assessment shows that it was like the resistance, which was nonsense. And the footage also it disproves it. But then the Israelis began to bomb hospital, and then remember the tunnels under, and then they went after hospital after hospital after hospital. And they leave infants in incubators to die. Remember all that? But now, so then the Western media just went quiet, because they can't just lie and lie and lie, because they have no credibility. They don't have any credibility, but it'd get worse and worse. So what did they do now? They're silent. Over the past week, we've seen some of the worst atrocities in this genocide. But you look at like these Western media outlets, nothing. They're talking about other issues. Why? Because that's just how it has to be. So these people they're carrying out the worst crime in the last few centuries, at least, simply because they're doing it in front of us and justifying it and being apologetic for it and trying to hide it, whichever one suits the purpose most at that particular period of time. And then he has the audacity to talk about Iranian so-called proxies. Ansar Allah is trying to end the starvation siege and the genocide. Hezbollah fought for well over a year in order to draw forces away from Gaza. Thousands of people in Lebanon were murdered. The Israeli regime targeted women and children. And Western news and Western media based in Lebanon were lying. There are journalists in Lebanon whose fixers were Lebanese, whose drivers were Lebanese, whose producers were Lebanese. They knew that these were ordinary apartments that the Israelis were bombing and leveling to the ground and killing huge numbers of people. But they kept saying Hezbollah strongholds, Hezbollah bases, Hezbollah targets. Why? Because they are foot soldiers of the Zionist regime. That's how the Western media is. So they talk about Iran's evilness. The heroism of Hezbollah is unbelievable. Palestinians fought for their lives, and they're fighting for their lives and for their survival and for their dignity and their honor. But Hezbollah made huge sacrifices for another people, not for their own, to protect another people. And so did Ansar Allah. So what they did is extraordinary. And these are evil people? Or the Americans who would provide the bombs to destroy all these apartment buildings and to carry out this genocide in Gaza. Every day we're seeing large numbers of infants and children being wiped out. And and large numbers of children being wiped out, and they're trying to eradicate the population. And they speak about crimes, and they speak about like Iran's allies as if they're the problem. It's obvious who the problem is. It's not just a problem. They are not civilized. They're evil. They're as evil as they come. In the past, people did not know that what the Germans were doing in the Second World War until the Russians started capturing the concentration camps. But the Israelis have been carrying out extermination for 19 months. And they talk about it openly. Their ministers talk about it. Their MPs talk about it. Their prime minister and president and defense minister, they all spoke about it from day one, how there are no innocents, how they're Amalek. We know all this. Yet the West still pretends as if they're the good guys. The audacity.
Professor Marandi, we had Trump's visit to the Middle East, and he went to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and how did you find his trip? Do you think that these Arab states are still somehow were still wanted to do something with the United States, or wanted to force an idea on their part to the United States, to Donald Trump and his administration, that the war with Iran would not benefit them? Do you see do you think that they talk about Iran, and what was the essence of that sort of talk, if that happened between the two?
Well, the way in which they treated Trump, I think, shows a number of things. One is it shows their own weakness. The fact that they treated him like, those old movies when I was a child, at least, there were these movies where the empire, the empire people would come and give their tributes to the emperor, and the emperor would have these really extraordinary and elaborate ceremonies. So these are kingdoms, but the real king is Trump. And so they were all like servants of the, or uh, faithful servants to the master. That's exactly how it was. What countries that you look at, and the ceremonies, it was quite cringe, actually. Just to see it, it was like, oh my god, how could they do this sort of thing? But it shows their inherent weakness. Otherwise, no country would accept being belittled and humiliated like that. And what Trump took away was it's non-existent. These countries don't have that money. Saudi Arabia is already, they're in a lot of trouble because of NEOM and all the money that they need to put into these mega projects. And the price of oil is very low, and these mega projects are like black holes. And the Emirates and Qatar, they too don't have that sort of money. And the money that they do have, I was saying this to a couple of our friends who came to visit us here in Tehran, who are experts and who are online and they're active. I was saying to them that, where is this money? Is it like in the Qatari king's bedroom? The money is in whatever money they have is in American banks. The money is in the United States. Either they bought buildings, or they bought, or they're in the bank, or they have bonds. It's all there. So what are the Americans? What are they going to do? Take it from one account and put it into another? It's nonsense. Probably the only thing that really came out of it, maybe some things came out of it, but the only big thing was the airplane that Trump gets for himself. Otherwise, I don't take all that none of this very seriously.
But we had Al Jolani joining Donald Trump and MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and it seems that the crown prince of Saudi Arabia was pushing for that. How did you find that? And because right now, when you look at the situation in Syria, it's not. Let's put it. They're dividing the country, but how is that going to be beneficial to Saudi Arabia? You mentioned recently the defense minister of Saudi Arabia in his visit to Iran. He was talking about the situation in Syria. I want to know what were the concerns on their part that right now they're pushing, they're somehow helping Al Jolani in Syria.
Well, a number of things. One is that Qatar apparently is not very much in the picture anymore, despite the fact that Qatar played a key role in destroying Syria alongside Erdogan and other pro-Western forces. And so it's basically the Israeli regime, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia now, but the role of Saudi Arabia is enhanced, obviously. What I thought was very good was, and people may disagree with me, but I thought the Jolani Trump meeting was a very good thing for people to see, because this is what we were saying from 2011. And of course, all the evidence is out there now. The only people who are still fixated on the notion of Jolani and these people being freedom fighters are those who are so, drunk in their sectarianism or in their racism, or they're just on the pay. They're getting, oil and gas money goes, in money from these countries in the Persian Gulf region. They corrupt intellectuals, they corrupt commentators, they corrupt people in the media, and they have they spend a lot of money on this. So, and of course, the West is the West. They do the same in a different way. But Jolani has been exposed in every way or form. There's no those who were used to make lie about the resistance or about Hezbollah or Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah or Iran and their actions in Syria and their intentions in Syria. Every single argument that they put forward has been undermined. Everything. This is not good, actually, for the United States. It would have been smarter not to see him, but they don't see it that way. So that strengthens the axis of resistance because it shows that the axis of resistance was right all along. And there's a clip of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, which I tweeted, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where he basically predicted all of this. He said that if Syria falls, this, and this would happen. So I think that that's important, but and very significant. In general, the situation in Syria is bad, and there's talk that there will be fighting between the American-backed Kurdish terror groups and the Jolani terror groups in the coming days and weeks. We'll have to see how that plays out. But the economic situation is horrific, and Trump really hasn't removed the sanctions. The sanctions are, they've been passed by Congress, and he can waive some of them, but it's just like with the Iranian nuclear deal, what Obama did. He basically kept the sanctions enforced. And the United States is not good at removing laws. Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison in South Africa, he was sanctioned by the United States, and so was the ANC. He was freed from prison, he was still sanctioned. He was still considered to be a terrorist. He became president, he was still a terrorist. He retired from presidency, he continued to be a terrorist. Years later, near his death, did the Americans remove him from the list of terrorists and the ANC too. The U.S. is swift at imposing sanctions, but it is very slow and incapable of removing sanctions that easily. So right now, the situation in Syria is not good, but it is not the burden of the resistance. People are suffering, sadly, badly. It's much worse than before, but it's not the burden of the resistance. And the resistance, as I said before on your show, has been vindicated once again after the Trump ISIS meeting in Iran. The resistance, the axis of resistance, has been vindicated once again. It's unbelievable, really. Just a couple of 3-4 months ago, he was wanted. He was one of the most wanted people by the United States. This is the deputy head of ISIS. The deputy head of ISIS. He was responsible for carrying out car bomb attacks in residential areas across Iraq, killing perhaps thousands of people, just women and children, just like the Israelis. And then beheading people in Syria and slaughtering innocent people in Syria. He was the deputy of ISIS, then a deputy of Al Qaeda, the head of Al Qaeda in Syria. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then he gets a handshake from Trump, and then Trump says what? He's good looking and he has a strong past, just stunning. So stunning. And then Iran is weird. And so Israel is carrying out a Holocaust. ISIS is now openly friendly to the United States, but Iran and its so-called proxies, we're the bad guys. And for your viewers, just keep in mind everything that you've heard over the last 40 years about Iran. It's always been this. This is how it's always been. It's always been nonsense. It's always been misrepresentation. This is nothing new. But it's now just become so absurd and so strange and weird and open that a 6-year-old child could figure it out.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
It's always a great pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.